Welcome to Roundtable Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about. We talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie. How goes it?
I'm good. I realized I put my all of my tech on top of my 52 for the journey journal, which is not helpful.
Bring it out to the surface.
Yeah, dig it out. Dig it out. Well, we're on week 7 of our 52 for the journey. If you're following along, these conversations, I would say, are universal. If you if you're not following along with our 52 for the journey guidebook, which I'm holding up now, ta-da, available on Amazon or in our church building if you are local. So because we're looking at a scripture every week is really what it boils down to. So don't feel like you have to, but if you feel like it, you're most welcome on the journey with us. And I also want to mention that we did not date the guidebook. Intentionally so. So every week is just a week number. We call it weeks. This is week 7 for us. But you can start with week 1 today if you feel like it. So it is your own guidebook for your own journey this year, and it will last for a year. So we invite you along with us or on your own. So week 7. Am I reading the scripture? Is that what's happening next?
You can if you'd like to.
That seems like a hospitable thing to do for our friends. So week 7 is 2 chapters long, give or take, and is Matthew 3:13 through 4:11. So here we go. When Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? Jesus replied, Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. Then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus answered, It is written, Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus answered him, It is also written, Do not put your Lord God to the test. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All of this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Jesus said to him, Away from me, Satan, for it is written, Worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. So we've been talking about this in various settings over the past couple of days. We recorded together a conversation for our online worship service. We literally just got off our Instagram Live is how this week's schedule worked out. And I have a question which actually starts at the end, which we haven't talked about, which is then the devil left him and angels came and attended him. What does that mean?
Wow. That's starting off at the deep end.
Oh, is it? Sorry. Splash.
No, it's good. It's good. It's good. So this is such a fabulous story, I think. And it's echoed in the other Gospels too, but it's not always told the same way, right? And actually, the presence of angels in the desert is also in the Gospel according to Mark, I believe. Okay. So there's this sense in which he's not out there alone, actually. We get the sense that, we think about him as being in the desert alone, but there's some company. In fact, in Mark, it says there were also the wild beasts were out there. So he's, he's kind of aware of the natural world. He's with some creatures while he's there. And he's been through a long time of testing. He's undoubtedly famished. I think there's the implication that he's not eating because, what the tempter wants him to do is to resolve that empty feeling in his stomach by using his powers in a magical way. Jesus refuses to do that. And so to me, the ending of this story implies that there's a presence there that wants to be helpful to him and encourage him, but it has been on the sidelines during the course of the tempting, so that Jesus really has to figure this out on his own. And then when that is done, then the support team comes in and attends to him. And I think that's a really interesting word, because it's non-specific, right? It doesn't give us an exact idea of what that implies. It almost leaves it up to our imagination. And maybe that's deliberate. I think a lot of times biblical stories don't fill in the gaps because they intend for us to try to do that ourselves. So, but I guess I would say there's an attentiveness to him in this sense, that he feels, that he must feel, that he's not been in this alone. And going forward, he's going to have the presence of that support. So that's kind of how I'm reflecting on it.
I was going to say this in the Instagram Live, but the conversation sort of took another direction. But I have to say, because you were talking about sort of these trials, this test. And so I've been, along with most millennials right now, fantasy books are kind of back as a thing.
Okay.
And there's a trope in them of trials, right? So the main character has to go through these series of trials, right? Like Harry Potter book 4, if you will, kind of that
Okay.
vibe. And so I have to say it reminded me of this a little bit. This idea of like you're going through the trials for a greater,
Yes.
to achieve something for a greater thing, or to prove yourself, air quote, worthy, or whatnot. So it's interesting too, because I find like the order of this story is very interesting, because we have, Jesus being baptized, and then he's out in the desert for 40 days fasting, and then the testing happens, then the trials happen, if you will.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of like an interesting idea of the order, that he's not, I mentioned this in the online service, that he's not put to the test in order to be baptized. That he's baptized and then he's put to the test.
Can I share a discovery?
Do, yes.
So we've read this a few times together, actually, right?
We have now, yeah.
Yeah. So as I'm reading it, as I'm listening to you read it this morning, one of the things that really stands out for me in the testing part of the story is if. If you do X, then Y will happen, right? Ooh. So in each case, it's conditional, right? If you do this, like if you are the Son of God, if you are who you say you are, then this is what happens. In the baptism, there's no condition. The Spirit says, God says, you are my beloved child. And that's really important, because there's no condition placed on it, right? If you behave, think about this lesson to a child, right? Like if you do this, this, and this, then I'll love you. Right. No, this word that comes first, that sets Jesus up for everything that he will do throughout his adult life, is basically you are loved from the get-go. That's our starting point. And the tempter turns that completely around and makes it all about conditions. And, conditions breed anxiety, fear, it can be a mind game, all of that's happening. And so that really stands out. And I just want to add one thing to it. This gospel is unique in one sense, in several senses, but when the voice comes from heaven to Jesus, it says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." In the other Gospels, it says, "You are my Son." So it's God speaking to Jesus. In this sense, it's a public announcement. So the public announcement, right, lets everybody in on the news that this isn't just true maybe for Jesus, right? This is God's saying, this is how I work. I start off the relationship from the basis of love, and then we work from there going forward.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that there won't be challenges, but what it means is that the basis of the love is unconditional going forward.
I never would have expected that I would have found, commentary on parenting from the book of Matthew.
And yet there it is.
And yet there it is. And it really is. It made me think, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but Dr. Becky on Instagram, and her whole philosophy of, she calls it good inside. And it's operating on the knowledge and assumption that every person is good inside. And that by acknowledging and naming and loving, almost to an aggressive love, like big, wholehearted love, the good inside, and celebrating the good inside, that we can then, as children of any age, live into that more, rather than being like, oh, you're this kind of kid, or oh, you're this, oh, you're this, oh, you're this, and the labels that some parents or some society likes to place on people. No, we're all good inside, and we can all operate from that place because we all have it. There is not, and so I think that's such an interesting thing. We were talking about sort of this idea of like secure attachment, that Jesus is so confident in God's love for him. He is so solid in that, and doesn't question it or doubt it one tiny little iota, that when the devil comes to him, he's like, I could give you this, I could give you this, I could give you this.
Right.
Jesus says, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
I have everything I need. I have God's love. I know who I am, and I can proceed from that place. I don't need this trapping. You could very easily stand it in the story, like a parent, a child, and like society chaos. Some might call that social media.
Exactly.
And all of that stuff that feels shiny and tempty. And maybe there's something to be found in this idea that if we're feeling fulfilled and loved and truly deeply loved and seen and honored, that we can more easily say, no, thanks. I'm good.
So yes, push that into another direction with advertising. If you think about all the ads that pop up on Instagram and in so many other locations, it's, if you purchase this program, then the following will result. It's always about putting us in a deficit position, right? And then it's designed to accentuate our lack of self-esteem in one area, or our neediness, or our fear of missing out, whatever it is, right? It's always designed to amplify that or exaggerate it. So then we will feel that we just can't live without this thing, this product, this tool, this whatever it may be. And this is happening to us all the time. These messages are coming to us on a constant flow. And they all, in their own way, seem indispensable. Just as these messages that the tempter is sending all seem so attractive. Like, yeah, right, wait a second. What if I am the Son of God? Why can't I jump off of this temple? Or why can't I? There's one other thing that comes to mind about this, and it's the temptation to make bread. And so the tempter says, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And I think a lot of people in churches will read that and say, yeah, why not? Right? Why wouldn't you do that? Feed the hungry and so on. But that's not what the tempter's talking about. Tempter doesn't say, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread, and create an opportunity for people to be nourished, right? It's just see if you can do it almost as if it's a cool thing. In other words, it's turning something that's designed to be, for the common good. Instead, it becomes a magic act. And I always thought that, it sounds on the surface like it would be the right thing to do. But when you think about it, it's using this for personal gain, or again, just as a kind of magic to amplify my powers, not to actually do any real good in the world.
Yeah, because it's that idea of like, well, feed yourself.
Right.
You're not trying to, this is not a feeding the 5,000 situation.
No, it's not, right? Great contrast, by the way. That's a wonderful comment, because when Jesus does choose to amplify whatever is there, it's always about making food available for other people. It's an act of hospitality. There's no hospitality in this at all. That's completely missing from the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as you were saying, there was animals abound, and, I don't think any of them would have eaten bread. So
Right.
there was nobody to feed.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
So we talked about this a little bit on the online service, but I don't think we have I don't know if we have a ton of crossover between the two. So I would like to talk about it a little bit, the second paragraph in the scripture, which is when Jesus goes to John and asks him to be baptized, and John's like, "What? No, this should be the other way around." And
Right.
Jesus says, "Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I also wanted to ask, because I always have stuck, every time I hear the word righteousness, I hear that there is no one righteous. I can't even get the quote right, but it's that idea that no one is righteous. I think there's a Bible verse somewhere that people like to use. So explain, help us understand, because what is righteousness in this setting?
I was rereading this morning before we went into the Instagram Live, and it almost felt like the translation could be, it's proper to do this because we want to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
kind of.
There's something that's got to be done here. There's a right way of doing this thing, right? And there's it's almost like the transfer of power, right? We just had the peaceful transfer of one, this past week that took place in terms of the political context in the United States. And there is a transfer of power that's happening here, because we believe that John the Baptist had his own followers and that he was probably popular in his own right. So he had to relinquish that power. I think what's going on here, I'm guessing here a little bit, but I think what's going on is that John has to relinquish his standing in order to make room for Jesus.
Sure.
But what turns out to be a little surprising here is that Jesus chooses to relinquish his standing in order to embrace humility and say, no, I know how to be humble. I know how to be a good receiver. I know how to be a servant. So John, you go right ahead and baptize me, because that's, the Son of Man, he will say down the road, the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served, right? So he is already picturing himself as someone who knows how it is to be in a humble situation. And there's actually a story that comes in much later in this gospel according to Matthew, where Jesus and his disciples will move out of their territory into a geographical area that's called Syrophoenicia. So this is outside of Galilee, which is kind of their home territory. And while he's there, a woman comes to him, and she's desperate because her child is very ill. And she says, please come and heal my little girl. And Jesus is extremely rude to her and basically dismisses her. The disciples try to shut her down, but she keeps coming at him because she's desperate. She wants healing for her child. And eventually he gives in after his rudeness. And he says, your faith has made you well. And again, he is willing to have the tables turned on him so that now this person is getting him to change his mind. He says, look, I'm only here for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And she says, oh, no, you're not. You got something that my daughter needs. So I'm sorry. You can have your mission statement. Doesn't matter here. Get to work. And he does. So I think that part of what's going on here in righteousness is that maybe we think of righteousness, we often use it, right, as self-righteous. Don't you get self-righteous with me, right? I mean, I can imagine one person saying that. And Jesus is saying here that righteousness is about being lined up, that's another way of translating it, or aligned with the way God works in the world, the way that God works in the world, which is by the way of service to others, humility, love for all, merciful and unmerciful, And I think Jesus is saying there's a new kind of righteousness in town. And I'm going to exemplify it by receiving from you rather than giving something to you. And this new form of righteousness will be on full display when Jesus starts his ministry, right? When he begins to heal, when he begins to be affected by other people's needs, when he teaches, it's all going to be about this. So the same man who's concerned about righteousness here is going to be the same man a few chapters down the road who's going to say, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And I think that's what's going on. He's trying to define a new way of being lined up with God. And I think that's what that phrase is, to fulfill all righteousness, to fulfill a new picture of what it means to be lined up with God.
Oh, so interesting. Okay, great. Well, it's just a different way of looking at that word righteousness, It's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay. So because it's like these two stories are together in a way, I've mentioned this before, that they don't, in my brain, they don't coexist right next to each other at all. At all. I had no idea. And so I think it's really interesting to look at them. And so looking ahead, what do we see? What do we know about what happens after Jesus comes back from the desert?
So when he comes back from the desert, virtually the first thing he's going to do is build a team. So, he's had his time of testing. He feels secure in his relationship with God, his understanding that there aren't any, ifs and buts there, and he can walk securely out into the world. And that's where he's going to reach out to the disciples, and he'll start to recruit. It's kind of a period of recruitment. And from there, they launch themselves out into the world, and they begin the ministry of healing, teaching, moving from one small peasant village to the next. When you think about it, they are as far off the map as you can get. Just imagine somebody in Rome, right, has no clue what they are doing way out there in the hinterlands. Right. But that's where the movement is born. So when our 52 for the journey continues, the next stage is going to be Jesus builds a team.
Well, very good. Well, I look forward to continuing the journey with you and with you all. Thank you so much for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.